Today I have my guest Nilan Chaudhuri in the studio with me. Nilan is a student, teacher, and performer of tabla, an Indian classical percussion instrument. Welcome, Nilan.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here today.
So you started playing tabla at the age of 5. Can you remember how you made this decision and what was going through your head at the time?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, 5 is a really early age to start an instrument. And I think what inspired me to start learning and playing drums at that age was that our father, is a percussionist by profession. And so, just being around the music since we were super young and listening to him practice, I wanted to start even earlier, but he was like, you have to wait till you're 5 because that's when he started. And so my 5th birthday, I started my first drum lesson on percussion, tabla.
You've been playing now for around 28 years. Can you describe why you were able to stick with it for so long?
That's a great question. I think there's kind of been different phases. So in the beginning, I think, I was intrigued to play because I wanted to do what, our dad does. I thought it was cool. And then I realized, wow, this is a really challenging instrument. And to get good, like any instrument, it requires a lot of practice and study. And so then I think I got sort of demotivated to practice. And then sort of in middle school and high school when, I realized that there were jazz bands and ensembles that I could play in, I was more inspired to play because I could start playing with other musicians. And then from there, got to the point where I could start teaching and performing. So it was like, all right, well, if I'm going to be doing concerts, then I better practice. And so there's been peaks and valleys in the interest.
With that said, you're also a talented traditional drum set player. Do you have you found any connections between Indian classical music and Western music, such as jazz?
Yeah, definitely. I think that ties into the last point with, as soon as we got to the age where there was, jazz band in school, in high school and stuff, I was introduced to the drum set. And yeah, there's a ton of similarities between percussion and Indian music and jazz music or rock and roll music because, rhythm in itself is a very universal language. So just having like a beat and different time signatures was something that I saw a lot of parallel and overlap with tabla and drum set. And started studying drums, I guess, when I was in 6th or 7th grade, something like that.
Nice. Was it ever difficult growing up in the Bay Area and immersing yourself in both American culture and Indian culture? Was there ever like a clash between the two?
I wouldn't say there was a clash. I think, the Bay Area is a really diverse place. And I think the community that, I grew up with, there were a lot of, Indian people who happened to be born here, maybe moved to America. So I don't think there was a clash, but maybe there were certain parts of the traditional elements of playing Indian classical music that some of my friends who didn't have an understanding in music, that was foreign to them. But I wouldn't say a clash. If anything, it was just an opportunity to, share the music with a new audience.
Can you tell me about a challenging time for you as a student throughout your musical career, when maybe you were frustrated or wanted to quit, and how did you overcome that?
Yeah, several situations. I think it's natural whenever you are learning an instrument or learning anything from your parents who are really good at it, whether it's music or sports, you're always kind of in their shadow to a certain extent. So especially when I was younger, there were phases where I was like, well, I'm never going to be as good as our teacher, so like, what's the point? But you break past it by just progressing through practice.
So you did have the unique experience of studying from our dad. What was it like to have that dual relationship between like father and teacher?
Yeah, it was dynamic, for sure. It's a great question. Like, I remember in the beginning, early on, when I was super beginner, he didn't even necessarily want to spend the time to teach me because he was like, there's so much that you have to learn with the basic technique that you should just go and learn from some of my senior students. And so that's what I did. Like, I remember I had my first lesson like on my 5th birthday with, my teacher, and then he was like, okay, go learn with my senior students. And then for 7 years after that, he didn't teach me anything. And then once I got the basics down, then he was like, okay, now you're ready. Like, you've learned the foundation. You can learn compositions, and I'll teach you. So I think that's been the challenging part. And when I started to progress, then it was like it got more fun.
Well, you're now on the opposite side of the table teaching students. What's your approach when you teach younger students? Do you use like similar techniques to when you were being taught, or
Yeah.
how do you approach that?
Definitely similar techniques, but I've also sort of modified it for like the modern era. So, for example, one thing that I do that I never had the luxury of is I'll type all the notes and compositions for my students prior to the class, and then share the notes, and we'll review the compositions together. Certainly never had that when I was learning, but I think it's sort of a different generation too. Our dad coming from India and teaching, and then me being born here, and a lot of the students that I teach were also born here, so we kind of have cultural similarities. And at the end of the day, music is universal and doesn't matter where you're from. You can always kind of feel the vibe.
Do you have any memorable moments or events that have stuck with you that you can share with us?
Yeah, a bunch. Every time I practice, it's a memorable event. Memorable event. But I mean, I can say, like, I remember, my first concert when I was like 11. That was really special. Like, first recital was cool. Sometimes I'll get called for these random gigs. Like last year, I got to do a concert with this rock and roll musician Beck in LA. That was pretty cool. And there's like some high profile other musicians who were like, oh, I'll sit in and play. So that was really special. But every opportunity that I get to, play and perform and teach is like, I learn something new about the instrument.
That's awesome. So I see you brought the tabla with you today, which is awesome. Would you care to show a brief demonstration?
Sure.
All right.
I can play something. I haven't warmed up today, but I'll try.
All right. That was awesome. Thank you for giving the audience that experience.
Absolutely.
Well, in closing, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to come down to the studio and talk about your experiences with tabla. Before we wrap it up, is there anything else that you would like to ask that maybe I forgot to ask?
No, I mean, thanks again for having me. I myself went to SF State, so it was fun coming back, and
I forgot to mention that.
Appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah. All right. Awesome.